Well, Chag Sameach HaKamatzot. Well, this is our last day of Feast of Unleavened Bread. Are you happy that you're going to return to leaven? Are you happy that you can go tonight and have some leaven? No? You want to remain unleavened, right? Yes. Right, there is a spiritual teaching on it. Well, last Shabbat, we looked into the Bible, to the records of the events of Pesach at the time of Yeshua's resurrection. And it is no doubt that Yeshua, resurrected at the time after the weekly Shabbat was completed. Most of the Christian denominations observed last Sunday Easter. In Christianity, the theme of this holiday is obviously the resurrection of Messiah. This is a wonderful occasion to celebrate such an event, is it not? We hope that soon, when we're going to have our own place, we will actually prepare ourselves for a special Messianic Jewish celebration of that event. Why do we not celebrate Easter? Many people ask me. And maybe when they come here, they say, why don't you celebrate Easter? Perhaps you go to the same question. Perhaps this little message be able to help you to understand this more deeper. Simply to say, because celebrating of Easter is Easter on that particular day, the Sunday, the Easter Sunday, stands from the earliest time of Christianity as a monument of replacement of theology from the Nazarenes or the Messianic Judaism of the first century. This Easter celebration, instead of Passover or Pesach as we say, is until this day surrounded with pagan influence and its tradition, like Easter bunny, Easter eggs, or sometimes even candlelight masses. Also is sprinkled a little bit sometimes with anti-Semitism. Yes?
Yes, isn't it pagan gods?
We'll talk about this. As the Messianic Jewish people of the Nazarene of the first century had many biblical traditions with observance of Pesach, Passover, so back then, in the early time of Christianity, the so-called church fathers had developed a new traditions for their rejection and replacement of Pesach, and establishing a new holiday, a new feast, called after a pagan goddess Ishtar. Now, the name Ishtar may have a different variation in different time of history of different cultures. Ishtar was a Sumerian goddess that was a wife to Tammuz. Both are spoken in the Bible. You can read about this goddess in the Bible, for example, in Ezekiel chapter 18, or Ashtoreth, it's a different name, and the queen of the heaven, another different description. You can read about this in Judges chapter 2, chapter 10, Yirmiyahu, and Jeremiah chapter 44. In Phoenicia and in Syria, her name became Astarte. In Greece, she became Aphrodite, and she is the Diana of Ephesus that I'll be reading in Acts. So here we have the different variation of the same pagan goddess whose name was Astarte or Ishtar. Depends which epoch, which culture we look into it. Now, another tradition, it's you have heard probably that some churches do observe 40 days of Lent. 40 days of Lent was observed by worshippers of the Babylonian Ishtar and by the Egyptians' god Adonis or Osiris. Also by the Roman goddess Proserpina. Lent was never known or in the way of the Nazarenes of the first century Messianic Jews. nor Easter, nor bunnies, nor eggs. The Easter eggs is traced back to the ancient Egypt, Persia, Greece, Rome, even China. In Babylon, eggs were presented to the goddess of fertility Ashtarte, a symbol of new life. The Easter bunny has an origin from Germany, from the ancient Germany. The rabbit became a symbol of fertility, and it is because of the multiplying as they do quickly. Now, it is the rabbit who's supposed to bring eggs on the day of the celebration of Ishtar. So, we see that there is so many connection of the pagan mysticism, pagan traditions, and here today, the newest version of it, of our time, which I was surprised, as I received the Christian catalog of the, what's the name of the company? Yeah, there is a name for it, it's the short way, or whatever. There's a Christian catalog that I have received. And they have display of those Easter eggs, and they're called now resurrection eggs.
They're also called they're supposed to represent the stone that was rolled over from the grave.
Of course, I can't collect all of the meanings and the mythology that is actually installed to this celebration of Easter, but we need to remember that all of these pagan symbols and the pagan name are now attached to the celebration of resurrection of Yeshua HaMashiach and to worship and to praise God, God of Israel. Now, you see, when we look at the scriptures, we see in the 2 Corinthians chapter 16, Shaul actually speaks, Paul speaks to the believers, and he said, "What agreement has a temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as Elohim said." My question, if I can ask you now, what are we reading? Are these New Testament teachings or Old Testament teachings? Because look at what he says. I continue. "For just as God said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out from their midst and be separate, says Yahweh, and do not touch what is unclean." Do you know that all of these things that I've just quoted from 2 Corinthians, chapter 16, verse 16 and on, as I'm doing verse 17 also and then 18, these are quotes, for example, from Exodus chapter 29, 45, from Leviticus chapter 26, 12, from Jeremiah chapter 31, 1, from Ezekiel chapter 37, 27, from Exodus chapter 28, 8, from Isaiah chapter 52, 11, from 2 Samuel chapter 7, 14, from 1 Chronicles chapter 17, 13, from Isaiah chapter 43, 6, and also the last one will be from Hosea chapter 1, verse 10. Why do I give you these quotes? Well, because when we read, not every Bible actually can give you a hint what Paul is actually quoting. So is the quoting that he is giving you, is it a New Testament quoting or Old Testament teaching?
Oh.
It's actually both, new and old, because I just quoted from the New Testament. So we see the unity of theology and unity of understanding. So he says, "What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as Elohim said. I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says Yahweh, and do not touch what is unclean. And I will welcome you, and I will welcome you. And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahweh Almighty." How can we then practice Easter? God forbid. God forbids. Now, historically speaking, The controversy against Passover celebration arose in 135 AD. In 135 AD. And it continues until our time, even now. There are some historical backgrounds that actually speaks about this very loud. And this is available publicly to find more details about. I just fished out some details. For example, a church father, as he's being called, his name was Epiphanes. He was a bishop of Salamis. He lived in 310 until 403. He says that, I quote, the 15 Jewish Christian bishops who ruled the Jerusalem Kehillah, the congregation, until 135 AD had observed Passover on the 14th of Nisan, which is Aviv, in accordance to the so-called Apostolic Constitution. Here in this Apostolic Constitution, or Diadacha, this was written to the believers of the Gentiles. And I quote, "You shall not change the calculation of the time, but you shall celebrate it at the same time as you brethren who came out from the circumcision, with them observe Passover." The quote is taken from Adversaries' Heresies, chapter 70, verse 10. So, this is one on the example when we have these records in the Christian church fathers who recorded these things. Another one is in 154 AD. 154 AD. Another Christian bishop is called Irenaeus, recorded some details about the meeting between the bishop of Smyrna, Polycarp, and the bishop of Rome, Anicetus. The meeting was about Passover and Easter. Irenaeus tells us that Anicetus was unable to pursue Polycarp, quote, not to observe what he had always observed with John, the disciple of the Lord, and other disciples with whom he associated. So, end of quote. So we see then that in the 2nd century AD, was a battleground, a time of divorcing of Gentile believers from the Nazarenes, or the Messianic Jewish sect of Judaism. That was the time where the vast majority of Gentiles believers gained control over the body of Messiah due to dispersed of the Jewish people and Messianic Jewish people from Jerusalem. That had happened by the authority of the Roman Emperor Hadrian at that time. At that time, Jerusalem was leveled down, literally. Everything was leveled down in Jerusalem and was renamed as a city under a new name, Aelia Capitolina. That was after the war of between 132 and 135 AD. Irenaeus suggests that the Easter Sunday was introduced by Rome by Bishop Soter. His name was Soter in 165 AD. He introduced this in Rome. At that time of Emperor Hadrian, edict was issued, and the Jews, the Jewish believers, and the Jewish bishops of Jerusalem were replaced by the Gentile Christian members and the bishops. That is the replacement of the power of the hierarchy, and all of the Jewish bishops, if we can call the Greek term on it, the leaders, they were all related to Yeshua by blood. They were far cousins to him or so forth. The first one bishop of the uncircumcision Gentile, a Christian, was named Marcus. He was the first one that placed the new theology to the Gentile believers. That replacement started very clearly between, that was the time that the replacement and a clear distinction had started between the Nazarene, the Messianic Jews, and the Gentile Christians. Now, in the Council of Nicaea in 325, Emperor Constantine declared, I quote, he said, "Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jews crowd, for we have received from the Savior a different way." End of quote. In the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, they put an end to the controversy over the date of Passover by decreeing it should be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first moon of spring. That is recorded historically. It now continued in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. They ensured that Easter Sunday would never be celebrated on the same time like Jewish Passover. The council decreed that if the 14th of Nisan, which is the Passover, fell on Sunday, then Easter was to be celebrated on the following Sunday. So as far as Christian Passover is concerned, the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD can be said to be beginning of the Dark Ages that lasted until the time of Reformation and continue until our time. They divorced themselves permanently from the Jewish roots of their faith. From that time, that which was the truth and heritage became heresy. From that time, they also became the persecutors of the Jewish people, both the Nazarenes and the Jews who did not believe in Yeshua. But both were involved in persecution, the Rome and the church together. Now, do you understand by all these facts what is the power of persuasion of majority? At that time, the Gentiles believers were majority. In the 2nd century already, they became majority of the believers. Because there was maybe a few tens of thousands of Jewish believers in Messiah. But once the gospel was spread among the Gentiles province of Rome, by thousands they were coming. They were the first one was the God-fearers, and then the others were coming and joined the body of Messiah. But over this 2 centuries, they became majority. And by the help of the Roman emperor, they actually were replaced in the authority. The Messianic Jews, they were replaced in authority and ordered to change their theology, their customs, their feasts. And this is the 2nd century. In the 3rd century, a seal of the emperor was on it, and the persecution started. And I could go on and on. There is much information about this. How the church fathers have recorded how they struggled with some of their own believers that still were holding to the feasts, observing, yet being on their side with the Gentile church. So they were forcing them and persecuting their own people who were holding to those things. Now, the theology of Easter Sunday, of course, is emphasized on Yeshua's resurrection. It is very important for us to recognize what had happened. That is our hope of what is yet to come. Yeshua's suffering, as we know, it is recorded that happened on Wednesday, though there is a debate and battle about it. But the church has set up Friday, fixed day, to be celebrated. This regards on which day Nisan 14 will fall, the day of Passover, or the 14th of Aviv. So we see that the majority or the power of persuasion is always on the majority point. Are they always right? In Christian churches of that ancient time when the Christianity was developing, much of the pagan mythology and theology that they had about the conflict between the light and darkness, which was expressed often by Apollo, Poseidon, Uranus, or Ahriman, was imputed to the Christian theology, introduced by preaching and by saying. For example, one quote is about Christos is the son of the new creation. He attacked the power of darkness, and on the day of his resurrection, he completely scattered the darkness of death and of sin. The pagan philosophy and the mysteries became the truth of Christianity that was being, at that time, the time of declining of paganism, because Christianity was conquering paganism at that time. That time was the declining of Christianity, of paganism, where the Gentile Christianity began to clothe themselves with pagan garments. So on one side, paganism was declining. On the other side, they were clothing themselves with their customs, names, and even mythology or philosophy. But Shaul warned the Kehillah in Colossians. Let's open Colossians chapter 2. Let's see what Shaul has in mind, what Paul has in mind in this kind of an attitude. Chapter 2. Let's go quickly to chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2. For I want you to know great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are in Laodicea, and for all those who have not personally seen my face, that their hearts may be encouraged, having been knit together in love, in attending to all the wealth that comes from the full assurance of understanding, resulting in a true knowledge of God's mystery, that is Messiah himself. Now, notice that Shaul says that he said in the beginning, for I want you to know how great struggle I have. So when he writes this, he recognized that he has a struggle. There is something troubling him. And he says in verse 3, in wisdom are hidden all the riches of wisdom, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I say this, so that no one will delude you with persuasive argument. For even though I am absent in the body, nevertheless I am with you in the spirit, rejoicing to see your good discipline and the stability of your faith in Messiah. Therefore, as you have received Messiah, Yeshua, the Lord, so walk in Him. As you have received, this is a first century letter, mid-first century letter. Having been firmly rooted, and now being built up in Him, and established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and overflowing with gratitude. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy, empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Mashiach. So, Shaul noticed that he struggles with them already, with those believers in Colossus. They struggle because obviously what he's addressing here, they were already being attracted to all kind of a men tradition, men philosophy, powers and elementary principles rather than Messiah. For in Him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in Him you have been made complete, and he is the head over all rule and authority. And in him you were also circumcised with circumcision made without hands, in the removal of the body of flesh by the circumcision of Mashiach. End of quote. Now notice here, this is a first century. As far as some scholars believe, this letter was dated on the year of 61 AD. My quotes were at least 100 years later, in the 2nd century, mid-2nd century, when we see the struggle already with the philosophy, with all kinds of manipulations, which was removing the believers from being grounded in Messiah, but rather, according to the bishops, and particularly that was the Bishop of Rome, who was the head in leading the Gentile believers away from the truth, away from the holiness. We see here that it's interesting that verse 11 says that in him you were also. Notice this. You were also. He is addressing the believers in Colossus, which were the predominantly Gentile believers, with some Jewish people, of course, too, because they were all over. But we know that even in that time, especially in diaspora, there was a part of Jewish and non-Jewish believers who formed the first kehilot, the first synagogues. He says, and in him, in Messiah, you were also circumcised with circumcision made without ends. When he says also, when he says you were also, he means as we were circumcised with the same circumcision without ends. Now Shaul was circumcised. All the Jewish people were circumcised, but he appeals now to a different kind of circumcision. Now these quotes about the circumcision we find in many places in the scriptures in the Tanakh. In Jeremiah chapter 9:29, in Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 9, and on and on and on and on. This is not a new theology that Paul came and he figured out about some kind of a new stuff, a circumcision of the without hands, by removing of the body of flesh, the circumcision of Messiah. Circumcision of Messiah is removing the stiff neck from our people, from the Jewish people. So when he thinks about removing of the stiff neck or the stony heart, he thinks that now the Gentiles are going to be circumcised in the same way. What was the result of our people that they were stiff-necked and had a stony heart? Do you know? They couldn't see Yeshua as the Mashiach. What else? They were always stumbling in obedience to God. They always came short of obeying His commandments, His voice as He spoke to them. Always in trouble. Always prophets were sent and rebuking them of returning to their first love. Now, I believe Yeshua HaMashiach is the best example of a Jewish person, because I look into him as a Jewish man. I don't look to him as to a son of God in this particular way. I first look at him as a Jewish man, because as a human being, he was like us. His anointing was not comparable to what we have, but he was a man like us. And I can see that in him the perfect example of one who is with a circumcised heart, completely obeying the Father as He speaks and to His mitzvot, His commandments. At this feast of Hag HaMatzot, the feast of unleavened bread, that speaks loud to the Bible as a symbol of our life, that is to walk with God in sincerity and in truth, without malice, without wickedness, without Torahlessness or lawlessness, without idolatry. I see this clear and clear that Hag HaMatzot speaks about that walk that we should walk. At this time, that represents His, Yeshua's, and our holiness. Yeshua arose from death as a first fruit. In Matthew 27:52 says that after him, the tombs were opened and many believers of the Old Testament saints who had fallen asleep were raised. What a hope and what a testimony of the power of God to all who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua, as in the book of Revelation we read. I have a question. Do you know the power of the persuasion of majority? And it not only in religious realms, but also in political realms. We have dictatorships, we have communist ships, all kind of leaders. When they gain majority, they move people's hearts and mentality to completely foreign to them and turn them to become radical. That which was established before became heresy, even in political realm. I know back in Poland, before the communists took over Poland, Poland was a capitalistic country. That was called during the communist time heresy to be capitalistic. Now Poland, the back, is again capitalistic country. So where is the heresy in the political realm? Which one is the heresy? The monocracy? It's the biggest heresy, right? Or some people call it democracy. I call this the monocracy because it actually opened the doors for the demons to do what they please. Not always majority is right. But the whole scriptures prove to us that there was always a remnant. Adonai had always a remnant that was pleasing him, who were walking in obedience to his voice and to his mitzvah, to his commandments. Now, it is a question I have for you. Is the majority always right? I want you to answer this for yourself and enjoy the rest of the day of the Chag HaMatzot. This to be continued on Shabbat. Be blessed.